Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. Back again. Got my boy Justin here, who worked for Star Rods for quite a few years. The dude knows a lot about rods. And of course, you've been there at Mudhole many times and built your own rods. And there's an article that you're holding in your hand. If you guys are watching, you'll be able to see it. It's called Rod Failure. And we're going to put a link to this too, so you can read the full thing. We're going to give you kind of the cliff notes and talk about why rods break. And here's the crazy news. It's like 2 to maybe 4% of rods that break are because of the manufacturer. And the rest is because of anglers, and so we're going to talk about all the reasons why, and then talk about how the companies handle it. Some companies are pretty nice, and they just, maybe they have enough margins or whatever, and they can kind of just absorb it and say, you know what, even though it was your fault, we're going to get you a new one. And some just say, you know what, this was 100% your fault, we're not going to replace it, or it's going to cost a fortune to do it. We're not obviously sponsored by any of these rods. We don't make our own rods yet. We will be doing some custom stuff here pretty soon, and we will have a pretty awesome warranty ourselves on there. Just knowing about this, we're going to talk about why rods break in different places and what it means when you see a rod broken in a certain place, and ultimately how to avoid it too, right? I mean, that was a big piece of this. So how to kick this thing off, dude? Like, because I think, so many people break a rod within a month or two of buying it, and they just automatically assume it's the manufacturer. And we've heard from manufacturers that say it's impossible for that to happen, almost impossible. Like, you basically, if it was a manufacturer defect, you're usually going to know it in the first couple of casts. Like, you will know by fishing it one day if there's really a fracture, something wrong from the manufacturer. Is that hold true?
Yeah. So to start, I am so ready for this talk. Like, this is something I'm very, very passionate about. Manufacturers will say that you'll know within the first couple of casts, first couple of fish. The reality is, every single rod, before it even leaves that manufacturer's warehouse to the tackle shop, had been stress tested. So there is a level of quality assurance put behind every blank before they mass release hundreds, if not thousands, of different models out for the consumer to grab off the rack and use. That time frame between leaving the manufacturer, shipping to the retailer, unpackaging out of the box and putting it on the rod rack, and then you buying it, putting it in your car and going home, those little impacts that could happen to the rod are probably what's going on, not the manufacturing defect of a blank. Because trust me, companies have failed enough in the past to know how not to fail again. The last thing a manufacturer wants is to put out and potentially 300 or 400 of a couple different SKUs or models of a rod are all breaking in the same spot. And then they go, oh my goodness, like there was a problem with baking and rolling that blank on the mandrel, and they want to eliminate that to the best of their ability. And here we are, 2022, and I can tell you, a lot of companies are pretty darn good at their QC before it ever even leaves their warehouse. So, this article is kind of a Bible, okay? Can't really see the whole thing, but rod failure. And this article is crazy. I believe Tom Kirkland wrote the article many years ago. It could be 10 plus years ago, but it rings true today. And he's the first person and possibly only person I know that took over 200 rod blanks from famous companies, St. Croix, Lamiglass, G. Loomis, and broke them, like intentionally broke them methodically through different ways, and then looked at how each rod breaks with pictures and cross sections to say, okay, this rod broke from impact failure. This rod broke from high sticking, and explaining what does high sticking mean, crush failure, fracture, overload failure. And by looking at all of the ways that these fibers split and break in these pictures, he was able to determine all the different reasons why a rod breaks. And trust me, that is way more information than I think anybody's ever thought about with a rod break. They just think a rod breaks and go, man, it can't be me. I've used a lot of rods before and I haven't broke a rod. There's probably a lot of factors that are, not seen to the naked eye that have affected that rod. That there's a cause and effect to this. So even though we as fishermen take care of a lot of our gear, we should, as a culture, except that rods are probably breaking because of some outlying effect that happened to that rod. Even if you ended up grabbing a rod, you never know whether it might have been nicked, or when it was put on the rack at a tackle shop, it might have fallen and hit, a metal railing on a corner. You have no idea. Could have accidentally, slid down the side of your truck and hit something metal on the side of your boat or your trailer or your kayak. And that little spot right there, you might not even see a scratch. That could be the weak link. It's surprising, how impact affects rods.
Well, what about via shipping? It used to be, you didn't ship rods to consumers 15, 20 years ago. Now it's a big thing, right? I mean, from Amazon to our Fish Strong site, Bass Pro ships out who knows how many rods every day. What about that, right? Because if it was me as a consumer and there was some damage done in shipping, it's not my fault, right? If there was an impact done from FedEx, how quickly would you know then, right? Is that the kind of the gray area where maybe it's not going to happen in the first couple casts, it's going to happen a month later, and that was an impact fracture from some type of shipping? What are your thoughts?
So there's a lot to that. Like, the manufacturers go through great lengths to make sure that how they pack the rods when they're shipping from their warehouse to another distributor or to a tackle shop, these boxes are very well padded. You have no control over the shipping process, whether it's FedEx, UPS, USPS. How they care for and transport packages is very subjective. And a lot of times when I would receive inbound shipments, sometimes I'd help out a tackle shop and unpackage rods, and I could inspect it. Usually you'd know right off the bat the tip's broken in the plastic sleeve that the rod comes in. You go, all right, that rod must have slid forward a little bit in the rod, box, or the box must have shifted while it was moving on the FedEx truck. Who knows? The ones that you don't ever really notice are the ones that don't have any physical signs of breakage, right? And it's good practice for a retailer, us included, to stress test just the tip section of each rod, just to make sure before they go out the door that, when it arrives to us and we, list it for everyone to purchase, we'll stress test every single rod just to make sure there wasn't an impact that happened to that rod before it leaves inbound again to the consumer. And I think every tackle shop should do that. We do that. That's a good quality assurance to make sure before you get it out and use it. And then on the receiving end, as a customer, when you receive a rod, just very lightly, you're not trying to bend the tip, just take the palm of your hand up the rod to the tip and just apply a little bit of pressure. Just make sure that it bends as intended, lightly. And you'll know right then and there, if you do that and it snaps before you even take it out and use it, something happened to that rod before it got to your doorstep.
That's great.
That is a good just precaution to take. When you guys go into tackle shops and you feel rods like, ooh, that's nice. Get a little palm to it and just stress the tip. I'm not going to encourage people to take a rod and say, hold on to that tip. Let me pull up on it, make sure it's strong. There's a science behind how a rod bends. So don't stress strength test it in the shop, but just out of courtesy, the last quarter of the rod, take your palm over it, give it a little bend to it, and that'll be a good indicator if anything happened in that section.
That's good.
That's all of it's going to happen for the most part.
Yeah, I love that. What you just said would help out so many consumers, and even the manufacturers who were scratching their heads saying, how do we handle this one? Is what you just said. As soon as it hits your house, assuming you're having it delivered or in a tackle store, is do that little stress test with your hand and on the top. And you'll know, right? Because the worst thing you could do is inspect it without actually doing anything, like doing any bend test or a flex test, and then fish, then you spool it up, and this another 2 weekends before you fish, and you finally fish, and then something happens. Then you're like, oh man, or some people it could be 2 months before they go fishing. And then you're kind of lost, like, all right, I don't know if it was me or if it was from FedEx or what. Yeah, I think, man, that's great advice. So to go back to this article, what were some big aha moments? And we're going to post the whole thing in terms of
biggest aha moment is for any rod that I've seen broken, and for any customer throughout my time working with Star Rods here at Salt Strong, is when a customer says, can you look at the brake? I'll show you the brake. Can you identify and tell me what the smoking gun is? How did it break? With this article, it is a helpful tool to say, all right, let me really look at this picture. Let me cross-reference all the different examples and images they've given to help get a better idea as to why. And the end result really is, I can't with definitive proof 100% say it broke from this. Like, this is the smoking gun. A lot of these in this article, a lot of these examples seem to be combinations. Like, okay, from this picture, it looks like it could be a combination of overload and shearing, or this could be a combination of spiral and ovalization. I mean, it's hard to really put the nail and say this is exactly what caused it. But overall, it does seem like a lot of this has to do with improper use, like high sticking and overloading. So too much pressure and bending, not just bending past the arc at which the tip was supposed to go, but bending it more than you should have altogether. And rods can carry a lot of weight. I mean, the strength test on a 7'6" medium power rod, medium heavy power rod, like you could probably pick up on a deadlift, probably pick up like a 15-pound weight, maybe even 20. It's pretty crazy. So it's a lot stronger when it's done properly. We'll have to make a video of that sometime to show how strong these rods really are. But when you take it past that point, past that, coming up to that 90-degree point, if you're putting pressure and you got a rod at a 90-degree angle and your line's going straight down where that angle is really sharp, you're going to snap that top quarter section of that rod. That's going to be high sticking. And I'd say that's probably 90% of the rods that I've ever seen broken is from that very reason. And I got to throw it out there. We went down to the Keys and Luke and I and you, we were catching a bunch of jacks. And right at the very end, Luke snapped his first rod. And I thought I was going to watch a grown man cry. Like, he was quiet. He was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened.
Yeah, Luke,
honestly,
for the record, Luke has been fishing his whole life. He's never broken a rod.
Yeah. Like it's
because he's usually pretty good about never high sticking and overloading it. And
yeah. Like, I mean, Luke of all people, and it happens to the best of us. It really does.
And it's because it wasn't a big jack either. Because like we think about it all the time if we're fighting like a tarpon or a big red or a big snook, but it was just kind of like, oh yeah, I'll bring it all the way in. Like, I'm like, oh, and then all of a sudden it was literally at the top. I mean, he literally high sticked it, and the thing, you could hear it. It just, and we were like, oh my gosh, it snapped at the top.
Yeah, we all kind of moved to the other side of the boat. Like, let this guy have some space and work through what just happened. It's a punch in the gut. Like, it hurts, but it happens to all of us. And know that with this information, with this article, and hopefully this podcast will help you understand that there are variables out of your control in choosing a rod. Just like with a reel too, that's a whole separate conversation. But know that the amount of quality control gone into this process is significant, to the point where for the manufacturer is trying to eliminate any possible reason why this rod, will break. And I mean, they're rated beyond what you need. I've taken medium light rods, just got a 35-inch snook. I put a ton of heat on that fish to keep it away from structure. That rod didn't snap. So it is not the fish. It was proper utilization of the right tool. And I mean, I've had that rod in my lineup. It's a custom rod I've had since 2014. So it's a light tip. It's handled some big fish. I've had it for a number of years. I've taken care of it. It's been banged around a little bit. I've been very lucky to, oh my gosh, knock on wood, nothing's happened to it right now. But for those people out there that have a rod for a month and it snaps, know that something happened to that rod and that it's not a defect in the process of rolling the blank, rolling the carbon fiber on the mandrel, baking the blank, removing the cellophane that holds all the epoxy in. I mean, it's a meticulous process. Nothing in that process caused that rod to break, because when that rod was done and all the guides were put on, you can bet that every manufacturer is stress testing it.
But here's the problem. Fishermen, and I'm going to just say men in general, what my wife's a little bit better about just owning it. And Luke did this, right? His gut reaction was, this not my fault, right? Because we don't ever want to take the blame on that, right? And it was an expensive rod too. Everyone's gut reaction, and this is rod he's been fishing with 6-7 months, and his gut reaction was, it was the manufacturer's fault. It wasn't my fault. But he knew deep down, and it was on video, by the way, too. I don't think we've published it yet. He knew, we knew, and we're like, dude, we were on video. I've literally watched you. And he high sticked, and then he knew he did deep down, and he's like, all right, 100% my fault. But that's I think that's the bigger problem is we as just human beings, and men in particular, we just, when something bad happens, we don't want it to be our fault. and it's easier to say, oh, as the manufacturer, hey, this, ABC company sucks or whatever it is. I think that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, I showed you guys. I've got
What
I've
was
got a
that?
star rod. I had a star rod that I broke. Okay, had an 8-foot, 12 to 20 pound. Broke it. Putting way too much heat on the biggest permit I've ever caught in my entire life, and I high sticked it next to the boat. Still landed the permit. That's the important part.
Wow.
That rod, even though Star does have a lifetime warranty and they're great to work with, they're an amazing company. I don't have the heart to go to them and say, man, I broke this rod, fix it. Like I broke the rod. That was my fault. And guys, it is a harsh reality that these rods are breaking because of misuse or some impact damage that happened to it beforehand, or a combination of the two. And the culture change, that I hope will happen over a couple of years as we educate anglers, both new, fresh into the industry, fresh into the sport, people that have been doing it for 25, 30 years, is have that paradigm shift of understanding that we should take ownership for these things. That doesn't mean that we need to eat it all the time. It just means that you should go to these manufacturers when these things happen, be forthright and honest and say, this happened. This is the whole progression. I don't know if it was me or if it was you guys, but this is all the information I have to offer. Can you help me? And let the manufacturer decide.
Yep.
Let the retailer decide how to best handle it. But know that the pointing fingers game, that's just, it's not the solution. It really isn't. So this is a big pill to swallow, I think, for some people, but I'm there. I've got a broken rod I've had since, July, August. And I really would love to get that rod back and use it. It's a special rod to me, at length, the power and action. It's important to me. I've caught a big fish on it. I want that model again. I may need to buy another one. And that may just be the reality that I deal with. And that's something that may be happening to you guys out there as well. So just know that the pros break rods. We all break rods. It's an inevitable.
And some manufacturers, have deals in place like Star that they will replace it if you wanted them to. Some have it where you have to pay a certain amount, obviously, for the cost of shipping it and or making it, where it's significantly less than what you would pay, full retail. Talk about that, about how different manufacturers are handling this when they get, evidence or samples, pictures of these broken rods.
This is a harsh truth, and it's not so much of pulling back the curtain and looking behind the fourth wall. But the reality is that I think each manufacturer, you could take 5 top name brands out there, and the quality of the warranty that they're able to provide is a strategic plan. They're able to do so because they had pre-COVID. This has changed everything in today's day and age. But before COVID, when there was a competitive nature of manufacturers to get brands to get shelf space here and there, companies had a lot of a product, and they would people buy in bulk, right, to get better pricing on things, to the point where they can allow for a percentage of breakage by customer user error. Let's say, 5%, maybe up to a maximum of 10% of all rods they sell are going to break from customer misuse. If they can budget for that and get enough and manage their costs and hold some to the side, they can offer a lifetime warranty, replacement, no questions asked, because they have accounted for that unforeseen breakage with the customer. Now, that's a great thing to do. And I think that helps build the presence, like, wow, this company is awesome because their warranty is awesome. I can tell you that the quality of all these blanks are probably all same tier. Like, the quality of all these blanks out there are all excellent. Everybody makes an excellent rod, from G Loomis to a company just getting into it. Let's say even Savage Gear. Like, Savage Gear make pretty good rods, guys. But one has been around for a lot longer than the other. Star Rods, G Loomis, St. Croix. Other companies like Bubba Blade made a rod, and people are like, Bubba Blade makes knives. They don't make rods. They make rods. And I'll tell you right now, they're not bad. All these companies make an equally performing product from my perspective, with a little notches here and there, but they're all pretty much on the same tier. The difference is that warranty. And that comes from buying in bulk, having enough to be able to support that offset of breakage. And when COVID happened, a lot of things changed, right? Everything changed. And companies retailers, us included, we started being able to purchase as much as we can to support the inundation of fishermen coming into the sport. And all of a sudden, certain companies that had warranties that were excellent, they sold their reserves of on-hand availability to support the retail shops and the fishermen. And all of a sudden, that number of breakage went up, and these manufacturers didn't have a rod to supply in their warranty. And they're like, what do we do? And this change happened fast. Like, I mean, a year seems like a long time. That's fast when you've been doing business the same way for 15, 20 years. So I think that as we move through 2022, it's going to be interesting to see the popularity of brands go up and down. I've seen Fenwick go on the rise. They're with Pure Fishing, great rod. The HMG Inshore, great rod, very, very strong. And their warranty is excellent. They do have a lifetime warranty. Star, to the best of my knowledge, still has a lifetime warranty, but a lot of this might be case by case on the manufacturers. And a lot of it's going to have to do with what do they actually have on hand at their warehouse. If they have it, they'll be like, let me help my customer. And if they don't, you know, that verbiage of what's listed on the website versus what actually happens when you go to them, there might be a disconnect there. But please be patient and be understanding that a lot has changed and people are trying to adapt. Every manufacturer, every retailer, us included, want to serve customers. We want to do the right thing. But sometimes you're dealing with unforeseen circumstances, and you just got to figure out how to pivot and how to make the right decision in the moment.
Yeah. And every manufacturer, by the way, has read this article. And I think you said what percent are from manufacturer defects?
So
2%?
I mean, the article had the title of 95, but out of all the rods built, about 2% of all rod failures happen because of an actual manufacturing defect. So 98% of the rods out there are from abuse, misuse, impact, shearing, whatever. And Joe's hearing it and you're like, so you're saying there's still a chance? but no, like it's paper thin, guys. It's not common. So yeah, over 95% of the rods are due to misuse or abuse. And that is the truth.
And so they know that. A lot of the retailers know that. And so when they're hearing the claim, right, they're automatically kind of thinking, all right, there's a 98% chance that this was a user, error, and the angler did something or maybe got fractured. Even Luke, I mean, Luke had admitted that rod is one that he puts in the back of his F-150, right? And it literally broke right around that area where it sits over that back lip. And right, every time he hits a bump, and we drove around to the Keys with that thing. It was 6
How
hour.
did I travel with my rods? How did I travel with the rods?
You had him in a rod tube and all protected, and Justin had his teddy bear holding them inside the rod tube. I mean, it was, they weren't moving anywhere, but Luke's literally was sitting right on top of that thing. I mean, all it takes is one big hit, and that is a fracture. But still, that's Luke's fault. That's not the manufacturer's fault. That's his fault for putting in the back of a truck, and he high sticked it, which on a little jack, which didn't help. So going back now to the 95%, you mentioned high sticking is number one. Is that seen by far? And then overloading, which kind of could tie into that. What are some of the other ones that maybe we don't think about? You said a couple words. I didn't even know what the heck they meant.
I mean, the first example they list is impact failure. And impact failure means that, like the example of riding in the back of a truck bed is perfect. Everybody puts their rods in the back of the truck bed unless they have an SUV and it rides inside the car. In my truck, like I'm always keeping my rods inside the truck. I've got a 4-door Tacoma. I've had 4-door Corollas, and I would still transport one piece 8-foot rods. It sucked. Even having a passenger next to me, they're like, man, come on. Like, you got 6 rods in this truck. I'm like, no, there's things that are more important than friendship. And this $200 rod is more important right now. So that impact is a perfect example. They happen from the most subtle things. You have seen me on previous podcasts hit my fan with a rod, and I was like, okay, I hope that nothing happens to that rod. And I've been very fortunate that nothing has yet. But there's those little things, and you take it for granted, or you forget about it, or maybe you didn't even know it happened. But that impact is the number one thing. And it tends to be actually a pretty clean break. It doesn't look like it's a big fraying of the blank itself. It looks like the break is pretty clean up top here. So it happened from like someone nicked a certain spot, You don't see it. The rod breaks in that location. You're like, what happened? Well, if it's clean, it's probably an impact break. If it's, as we go down the list and we look at the other options,
Yeah, let's keep talking on them.
if it's frayed, you know, an example would be like a crush failure. Something's crushed. See that top section right there? That looks like it's a puzzle pieces trying to fit together. That looks like you ran over it with your truck. Like that's what I see. And I'm sure that's what retail or, you know, tackle shops probably see when they get a rod come back. Like, I broke it on a fish. Come on now, buddy. Did you break it on a fish? So this article helps share a lot of these truths in a clean format in a couple pages that you can look at and say, you know, if I do my due diligence, I as the fisherman can probably look at this and say, yeah, I think it's associated with this right here. Not, what does the break look like when a, you know, 40-pound redfish hits it right next to the boat? Well, sir, I think that looks like a high stick, to be honest. You know, when you look at it, just an example. It's just an example, but this is an incredible resource. It really is.
So what are some of the other ones besides impact and
crush failure? There's
crush?
fracture. Overload is interesting because overloading and high sticking, kind of the same thing. Overloading and high sticking are both improper use of the rod itself. High sticking tends to be determined with a section of the rod. Let's say the last quarter of the rod, you know, 3-4 guides down. If the break happens there, a lot of times that's probably the number one thing that will happen is high sticking. That's the reason why it broke. And that's as a rod breaks that 90-degree angle, like we talked about, and it breaks a quarter of the way down, high sticking. Overload is actually what happened with mine. So mine happened, and I've got about 3 guides down here until the last reduction guide. This happened about halfway down the rod. This is a pretty clean break. And looking at it, there tends to be a little bit of fraying. I don't notice it that much on this rod, but this didn't happen from high sticking. This happened further down the blank, almost halfway down. And I snapped it because of overloading. I put way too much pressure down the rod and lifted it too high. That was like a 20+ pound permit right next to the boat, putting heat on it. That was my fault. So that's easy to identify. Some other options included shear failure, spiral failure, combination failure was one. They go in depth as to explaining.
What is shear and
spiral they were a little hard to differentiate, but they have to do with the twisting of the blank itself. So, you know, let me try to grab a rod now that my fan's not on and I feel safer. When a rod is being bent, when a rod bends and the blank starts to twist this way or the other way, you're bending and then the bend starts to move that way. If you're trying to fight a fish straight out in front of you and the bend happens and you don't follow that fish with the rod while he's moving to the right, and that bend happens straight up and down and then starts bending over to the right and your rod is straight forward, that's probably going to be due to spiral failure or shear failure, where the rod is bending at an odd angle and you're not following with that fish. So one good example that comes to mind, Daiwa incorporates their X45 technology. What it is it's graphite. It's being wrapped on the mandrel. They have graphite that wraps up the mandrel, down the mandrel. Then they angle the sheets of their graphite to wrap at a 45-degree angle up and a 45-degree angle down. And that angular wrap, that X cross, provides rigidity when the rod is bent at different angles. Shimano does a great job with high power and Spiral X. It's their implementation of like a carbon tape woven and wrapped in like a crisscross pattern to prevent, you know, breakage when the rods are bending at these angles that are different. It helps a rod bend true to its spine or spline. We've talked about that in the past. What's a spline? The natural bending of where the rod wants to bend. The more reinforcement you provide in that rod, the more strength and durability that rod's going to have, but it's going to have a much crisper action. It's going to feel like a really fast action. It's going to want to respond straight up and down. It's going to be more durable, but it probably won't have that soft finesse feel that some rods have. So some are built with those type of technologies and some are not. I don't believe the particular rod that I had that type of technology in it. So I broke it from overpowering, but shear and spiral happen from when the rod is bending at an angle.
Any other ones?
Breakage due to defects. And that's what I'm looking into. They kind of left that on the different reasons. What are some potential breakage due to defects if it actually does happen? They wrote bad tack, loose roll, dents and bumps. I mean, a lot of these dry spots, a lot of these seem to be visual acknowledgement of knowing like this looks a little funky or wonky on a rod. Bad tack is the first. That's pretty much explaining the process of time in the baking process when a sheet of carbon fiber. Oh, I need things to explain. Imagine that's sheet of carbon fiber, and inside of this is epoxy. Okay. That epoxy, when it wraps onto a rod, okay, and they use cellophane tape really tight and they squeeze it onto the steel mandrel, all that epoxy is kind of oozing out over the graphite, the sheets, and then it's put in an oven and it's baked so that that epoxy cures. Bad tack would be not hot enough, not in there for long enough. You know, the epoxy didn't harden quite right, or there was a soft spot in it for whatever the reason. In their QC process, rods will break, and you'll see a series of rods break in the exact same spot. And if the manufacturer's like, oh my gosh, 30 or 40% of this SG817FT70 SKU is breaking at the same spot, something's going on. And then they go back and they address it. That won't be apparent to the naked eye. Bad tack, curing of that epoxy, you'll never know. But the manufacturers have probably figured it out by now to prevent that from happening. So that was an example of one, but it seems like the others were visual ones. I saw one that was over sanding, and that is pretty much sanding these blanks to where they have a clean, perfect taper. And there might be an over sanding too much in one spot where it creates like a weak point, and that will break there. So there's a couple of manufacturing defect examples in here to look at for reference. And again, we'll have this link available here in this podcast so you guys can go back and look at it and access it at any point. It's really, really helpful.
Yeah. And the pictures are super helpful.
Yeah. It's crazy.
That's cool. Awesome, man. Well, yeah, we wanted to get on here and do this because we've had a lot of people asking. I mean, you know, we've got our custom rod with Bull Bay we've been selling, and obviously we're massive fans of TFO and fish with and sell a lot of their rods in our store. And we have been working now for, gosh, almost 2 years on our custom rod with Mudhole. Everything's, you know, taken a whole lot longer with COVID and supply chain issues and even just components. Everything just, man, it is absolutely nuts, but it will happen this year. And we're having to go through this same kind of process, right? All right. If this is how many we plan on selling, and we know there's going to be some breakage, whether it was in the manufacturer being Mudhole or not, we still have to honor that stuff and come up with an exciting warranty for when it does happen. So yeah, we'll have more details on that, but yeah, the best thing to do is be honest. Obviously, if you know, like, kudos to you, right? You knew you did it. There are times where, you know, you just don't want to take blame and take advantage of the company. Try not to do that, right? And it's just like anything, right? Even if there is a warranty, if enough people do that, like what's happened here recently with a lot more people and a lot of newer people who are coming in and just assuming it was the manufacturer's fault, that raises the price for everybody else, including you, right, for the next round. I mean, so if everyone just starts taking advantage of the manufacturer and asking for free rods, even though it was your fault, all it does is just increase the price of rods going forward forever, which is not good for really anybody. So I'd say, you know, honesty first, and then education, which is why we're doing this. Cause I've seen that article and I didn't know a lot of that stuff. Like I said, I hadn't heard a couple of those words. Like, what the heck does that even mean? So it was super, super helpful. And of course, if you want to save money on your rods and reels and lines and lures and terminal tackle and everything else, join us in the Insider Club, right? I mean, heck, save 20, 30, even we've done 50% off some items, some of our proprietary stuff there in our store for members only. Everyone else has to pay full price. But if you're a member, you get 20, 30% off every single thing in the store. And we have people who save thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just from the discounts alone. But the main reason why we started the club was to help you find the fish. So every day, Monday through Friday, we're literally going and fishing new spots. We'll go pick a spot we've never fished before, videotape the entire thing, and show you what happened, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then show you the pre-trip plan and the post-trip analysis. So Monday through Friday, there is a new on-the-water fishing report that we show everything. We're not like a fishing TV show that shows you a highlight reel and that's it, and a bunch of product placements. There's no sponsors. There's no fluff. It's literally, here's what happened, and here's how you can recreate this in your area. It's all about like real time. And it's so if you like Justin, if you're fishing today, that thing's going up in a couple days. It's not going up 9 months later like a TV show or a magazine. By the time you get it, it's kind of stale and the fish have gone to a different zip code. So I love it. I think it's the best way to learn is to see someone actually fish a spot, and that's how you really dial in the trends and just how to approach a spot, right, based on the wind direction and based on the tides. I mean, that's just incredibly valuable. So join us, saltstrong.com. You'll see a place to join the Insider Club right there, or you can just go to saltstrong.com/pricing. That's the pricing page. It shows our latest and greatest deals to join the club. And we'd love to have you in there. 27,000 plus members as we record this and growing like crazy every single day. And we appreciate you current members. You guys are amazing. Definitely the foundation of the company. And we got some cool stuff coming for you guys, including, like I said, some tackle that will only be available to Insider members. Booyah. Anything else, dude?
Come join, learn a lot, make friends. That's what's up, man. This is a happy place.
What else could you want in life?
I don't know, man. I got it all.
Okay, that's it. Cool. Then I'm gonna go back in the community and see what's going on.
Same here.
Peace. We out, guys. Appreciate you. Whoop, whoop.